Hey everybody, it's Jeremy. Welcome to a new Dominions 6 video? Kind of question mark. So I did a little video for the announcement of Dominion 6 last week, or was it 2 weeks ago? God, time is flying at this point. I can't honestly remember. But in their announcement, the makers mentioned that the Steam page would be coming up soon, and indeed it has. We have Dominion 6, the rise of the Pantocrator, or Pantocrator. I think it's Pantocrator, but I think it also depends on regional dialects. I think British English is more along the lines of Pantocrator. I don't remember. Anyways, I looked it up like one time when I first started playing Dominions 5 many years ago. Anyways, that is neither here nor there. We're gonna do a impromptu kind of like review of the Steam page of what's going on here. And speculate about a bunch of different things and talk about, different scenarios. We're going to go over these screenshots, etc., etc. But first, we're going to read through some of the verbiage and kind of orient ourselves with what we're looking at, because I think once we read through some of the verbiage, we're going to have more context for some of the screenshots that we're going to see. I'm obviously going to miss things. I'm going to overlook things. I'm going to misinterpret things. If you have opinions or ideas, hit me up in the comments below. I'm very excited to see everyone's kind of like interpretation of what's going on, or what we're looking at, etc., etc. So, kicking things off, Dominions 6, Rise of the Pantocrator. This is all kind of like the very generic, stuff that we know. 4X. This looks and feels very like Dom 5 already, so I don't think we have any big surprises there. No planned release date, though they have said released at the end of 2023, expected to be released at the end of 2023. So that's, cool, very nice. A Christmas-ish kind of like launch would be pretty neat. Starting off the new year with 2024, getting into some, kind of like delving into the mechanics, the new ideas, new multiplayer, new metas, etc., etc. will be really cool. Or hopefully, anyways. Your God, I'm not going to read through all of this because this is the kind of like lore bits, but this is still exceedingly similar to Dominions 5. We're gods. We're going to be the next Pantocrator. Cool. 4X strategy versus AI, player versus player, team play versus AI. Already something that exists, but is something that's kind of, thing to think about. I hope that there's going to be more there, right? Blah, 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 blah. Huge variety of units, spells, magic items. Take control of powerful being. Ascending to godhood. When you start your game, you determine your dominions, followers, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's all the typical stuff. Down here is where we get into some actual Dominions 6 information. So, this I'm actually going to read. Dominion 6 is scaled up compared to Dominions 5's, and armies are larger. So we saw some representation of that already in the screenshots. We'll take a look at that further. We want to tweak the balance between conventional armies and magic. To accomplish this, a couple of things are introduced. Incomes and resources are increased. Fucking cool. While mages are more expensive. So if mages are more expensive than they were, but we're getting more income and resources, that means that we might be producing about the same number of mages that we were in the past, but more units for larger armies. Makes sense. I see what we're trying to do there. Battlefield-wide spells are more difficult to cast, and there are instead more mid-tier spells. That sounds awesome. There are some other changes with the same aim. So this sounds like the conceptual idea of trying to kind of like expand the mid game, and maybe into the late game as well, but really like have a situation where the mid game, it's harder to get to those tier 7, tier 8 spells that really kind of like alter the landscape of the battlefield, have more armies be involved in things, have mages kind of stick where they are by keeping them more expensive, or by making them more expensive, but increasing the income and resources that we're going to getting, which means that we'll have more income, but we'll be able to get roughly the same amount of mages, perhaps, right? Maybe not. I don't know. But overall, the sounds really interesting. I especially like the idea of more mid-tier spells, right? A wider variety of mid-tier spells, and what I want specifically is a wider variety of more effective mid-tier spells, because we actually have a lot of mid-tier spells right now, a lot of which never get used, and I would love to see them have more of a purpose, more either of a niche purpose or a more broadly applicable purpose, right? So yeah, that's pretty cool. And then other changes with the same aim, also obviously very vague, but indicating that there are other things going on to kind of reinforce this idea of more mid-tier magic, more armies, bigger armies, right? Cool. Second, and probably most influential change, is the addition of a new magic path. All right. No longer are illusions the domain of air magic. Instead, illusions, phantasms, dreams, and the stuff of forgotten legends are manipulated with the path of glamor. This has resulted in many new spells, items, and sites being added to the game. This is actually really exciting because this sounds to me like this is going to be a direct impact on the Elven nations, right? The Elven nations being very popular in the meta of the game, very powerful, generally speaking, powerful nations, and easy to get into nations. They have a high ceiling, right? But they also have a high floor. But part of that tends to be because many of them have very good magic paths for raiding, very good basic sacreds with glamours and stealth and things like air magic to go into it. So if that's being separated out, if we're having air magic that is more air-oriented, more lightning-oriented, that kind of concept, and then glamour magic that is more of that phantasms, having mirror images, that type of thing, if that's separated out, then we could see a situation where maybe a nation like Vanheim, for example, maybe they're not an air blood nation, maybe they're a glamour blood nation, right? Which means maybe they lose some of that effectiveness with cloud trapeze and mist form and things like that, or maybe they double down on the existing scenario, the air glamour, and instead they maybe lose a little bit of blood. Who knows, right? Like, this is all up in the air, but that's kind of like the things that stand out to me is interesting nations that already have a lot of good strength in air now being split between air and glamour, or going in one direction with glamour, etc., etc. So that's really, really cool. I like that. I am probably, this is just me being OCD and liking symmetry too much, but I am somewhat disappointed maybe that we're only hearing of one new magic path. I had hoped that we would get 2 new magic paths, actually, but it is what it is. It's I'm not upset by it, just would love to have had an additional path be added into the game as well. But regardless, there's already so many magic paths in the game, it would be unnecessary. Even this is probably unnecessary, right? But it's cool, and it's new and shiny, so I'm like, yeah! Anyways. Third massive change is the separation of mounts and riders. Riders and mounts now have separate stats and can be targeted individually. This change probably has less impact on gameplay than the previous one, but will still have an impact on cavalry and nations using mounted units. This is actually really interesting. Again, kind of like a lot of Elven nations have cavalry units. I'm interested in how these affects both the glamour kind of scenario and the mounted changes are going to affect them. I wonder if we'll see more specialization, not just in cavalry, but also anti-cavalry units. If we'll see scenarios where, like, spear units or pike units or things like that, glaive units have a better time maybe taking out the cavalry, the actual mount of a cavalry unit, and seeing how that goes. That could be pretty cool. And I wonder how much we're going to see cavalry units where the mount dies and the rider then is now an unmounted unit and has a different model, perhaps different parameters, etc., and continues to fight, or if the rider gets killed, the same thing for the mount. Because we have a little bit of that second one, right? Where there are certain nations that have that, like, the rider gets killed, the first form gets killed, and then it's just the mount itself. And if you keep the mount alive, you can sometimes get something, sometimes not, right? You can sometimes regain the unit. I'm curious if we'll see the reverse, because I don't think there's actually any or much of any in the game. Maybe in some mods or something like that, where the mount can die and the rider can keep fighting. So that's really interesting to me. I really want to see what's going on with that. I'm also just interested to see if this is going to kind of like help shake up the game. Because later on, cavalry tends to be very strong in the early game, but tends to fall off in the late game as we get more battlefield spells, because you can typically pack more infantry into a square, which means you're getting kind of like more bang for your buck across the board. You're affecting more units with your battlefield spells, etc., right? You're getting more attack density, usually, depending on the unit. So I'm interested in all of these kind of changes coming together and creating a situation where we have a longer mid game, we have a harder time getting to some of those battlefield wide spells, right? More effective mid tier spells. We have larger armies, which for me, I really want to see more diverse larger armies. Reasons to not just have 200 of the same unit, but to have, actual cores to address different things, like having a standing infantry line, like a shield wall or something like that, having cavalry to actually do flanking attacks and things like that. Because I feel like a lot of time that'll happen in some of the early mid-game wars. It's kind of just like a pick the unit to counter the units that you're going up against in your war, and obviously that makes sense, right? But later on, there doesn't really seem like there's much of a point to diversity. In point of fact, it kind of turns into a game of like, what can you summon the most of that is the most effective, and that's it, right? But if there's some reason to keep your armies diverse, if there's some reason to kind of like, these cavalry units remain useful outside of sacreds. Obviously, a lot of sacreds are really useful still into the late game period. But that seems very interesting to me. So this is a cool change. I'm really excited about what can happen here. I'm also excited because I think this is going to be. I don't know if this is true, and people who are more experienced in the mod scene can probably tell me. I'm guessing that this is going to allow for more opportunities from a mod standpoint when it comes to messing around with mounts and things like that. Being able to swap between mounted units and unmounted units, perhaps. Being able to do things like I was saying, right? Like have a rider that gets knocked off of their horse continue to fight in a different form. And that might actually allow more, if that system is baked into the game, that might add more flexibility for the modding community. But that, again, that might already exist and I might just not be super aware of it. Anyways, really neat features. So, Dominion 6 will feature a number of new nations as well. Cool. Kind of expected, but cool. With late age getting more, that's good. Late age kind of needs the love. The addition of the Glamour path has also affected several old nations. So, yeah, I think that's an easy assumption, right? Immediately talking about, like, Vanheim as an obvious scenario. My assumption being any of the Elven nations or pseudo-Elven nations are probably now going to be focused on Glamour, right? Anyone who has Glamour, right, on any of their sacred units or anything like that, I would assume that a lot of their mages are now going to have the Glamour path, and maybe have less of previous paths than they used to. So that's pretty cool. There are also a number of changes intended to ease gameplay, and specifically they have called out quality of life and UI improvements. So hopefully Hopefully that'll go really well for us. Um, I don't know. This is going to be kind of like that variable. It's hard playing a game for so many years and getting really, really, really used to the system that you're playing in, right? Because we've all played Dominions 5 for a while now, and it turns into this situation where we're not happy with a lot of the different like UI elements and some of the like reporting features or the quality of the lack of certain quality of life. But we're used to it. So even though we definitely want something new and shiny and pretty, it can be a hard swap going from the thing that you're very familiar with to a new thing. So I'm hoping that this is going to be an easy transition. I'm hoping that there's going to be a lot of cleaner UI and more obvious ways to get the information that we want. More responsive feedback, that type of scenario. And what I mean by feedback is like from the devs. I mean within the game, right? Like input feedback of what you just did being shown to you so that you understand what you just did. Because a lot of these games are played out over the course of weeks or months. So having clear indicators of where you've directed troops, where you've aimed magical rituals or things like that, that's going to be really, really nice. They have talked about that, so hopefully that's going to be a very big situation. So, and then more stuff will be added in the upcoming months. Very excited about this. A little bit of a review of the system requirements. Basically, nada, right? 750 megabytes for space. Almost every modern computer and phone. Blah, 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 blah. So I'm sure we'll get more specifics when we actually get closer to the deadline. So, deadline, release date. My brain. Okay, let's actually take a look at some of these screenshots, shall we? So, knowing what we know from what we just discussed, we can immediately pick out a couple of different things, right? So this is a screenshot of Solaria. We can see over here where all of the gem and gem income scenarios are. We have our fire, air, water, earth, astral death, nature, and then we have this little multicolored rock, which we're going to assume is glamour, right? So that's really cool. Blood still being in here. It looks like across this top, we have a lot of little icons. That's kind of indicative of what we had on the right side, perhaps. But this also looks very similar to the way things are done in Conquest of Elysium 5, right? So it looks like maybe they're shifting to more of this icon representation so that you can go up there and click and then go into different menus and things like that. So that's pretty cool. We can see a couple of other things. We can see larger indicators for different sized groupings, which is kind of neat, right? We can see a small army here is kind of like this little medium-sized check. Looks like maybe there's just a mage or something like that moving over here. And then there's actual, like, a decent-sized army moving from this section, leading to a larger red check mark. That's kind of neat. We can also see this little golden kind of like line over here pointing from this direction up to this one. And I'm hoping that's indicative of some sort of like magic ritual, whether that's like a teleportation or a cloud trapeze or maybe like a remote site search or something like that. Anything to kind of indicate. That being said, I am somewhat concerned from what I see here about the late game. So I hope we get some controls on how maybe customizing how aggressive these effects are, because if you're getting to the late game and you're moving 14 different, sized armies, and you have this massive arrow and this massive arrow, and then these 4 other smaller arrows, and then way over here you have this massive arrow, and then you've got 27 little gold streaks all across your map for the magic rituals. Hopefully, there's also another magic one right here, right? So hopefully we're going to get some sort of controls on how aggressive these effects are, maybe be able to tone them down or just turn them off and on when we want them to be available. That would be really cool. I do really like this this kind of like element over here, this province details. All of the information is very nice here. Very clear, very clean. Love all of this, and it's I don't know, it feels very clean and shaped up to me comparatively. So liking it. Very neat. I don't know that we're seeing anything else super crazy interesting in here that we're not just kind of like, you know, really guessing on. But overall, looks neat. Looks like Dominions 5, which I think is a good thing. I don't think we're looking for, oh my god, this jumped into a completely different graphics scenario. This looks like Total War or something like that, right? We're expecting more of the game we know and love, just updated UI, new nations, maybe new mechanics, new magic path. Cool. That's awesome. So next up we've got a little demonstration, and this is a very clear indicator of that bigger army situation, because this is significantly wider than we have seen in the past, right? So probably it looks maybe about like 30% or 40% wider on the scale. My assumption might be incorrect. It might be significantly larger than that. But this looks pretty wild. I would love, in addition to this, I love the idea of larger armies. That's great. But I would also love more precise camera controls, perhaps. Obviously, the way that the camera works in this game is very basic. I would love to be able to more cleanly zoom in and out of things. I don't think we're gonna get the ability to, like, you know, like pan around or like change the angle of our depth or anything like that, but that would be really cool if we could do that. I don't anticipate that though. What do we actually see here though? We see the increase in the size of armies, which is neat. We see pretty diverse armies, comparatively, not super diverse, but pretty diverse. We've got some, what are these, flagellants, we've got different knights, we've got sacreds, we've got corps of mages, similar type situation. We can also see some of the graphics updates. Falling Fires, right? Having this all the way from the heavens kind of like scenario. When I first saw the screenshot, before I actually started looking in them and reading, I was like, holy shit, is that like Flames from the Sky or Gifts from Heaven? No, this is Falling Fires, but it looks like this is something that they're talking about more in the mid-tier, right? Like increasing the efficacy of those types of spells, because this is, you know, looks very cool, but is also smacking a huge range and hopefully going to be doing a fair amount of something, right? So we've got that going on. And then we can also see these little terrain features all dotted throughout the battle map. This is something that they mentioned, the idea of having terrain features that are kind of like breaking up the battlefield. So enemies, like your formations, get kind of choked up on them. If you run into a bunch of space where there's just, you know, shit in the way, perhaps that can like sway the fight one way or the other. I think that's very interesting, but I am very curious about its implementation, because I'm concerned. I don't want it to be implemented willy-nilly. I don't want it to just be random shit in the way, right? Because I feel like that is going to lead to situations where people get really pissed off, where it's a very close, tight fight, and someone gets screwed over by a piece of random terrain, right? Like, one flank collapses because they can't actually get to the targets that they need to because of they can't control this in any way, shape, or fashion. Random terrain. That sounds like it would be pretty bad, but the idea that there could be, you know, sites or fortifications that you could put up, or special units that maybe come with their own fortifications, like not palisades. What's the things that you put in front of archers, right? Someone will know what I'm talking about. But those types of things, or like digging ditches or things like that, like having special units for sapping and things like that, could be really cool if you knew what you were going into. You were like, I'm going to try to fight in this province because this province has a I don't know, like a ruined wall, right? And I know, because I've fought here before, that the ruined wall is on this south section of the map. So I'm going to put all of my archers right here so that they're behind this wall. See, that kind of concept feels really cool to me because then it's an informed decision that the player is making based off of the terrain that they have experienced. And it's fine if you go into a place and you've never seen the terrain and you kind of get fucked by it then. That's okay. But I'm concerned that it's going to be just like procedurally generated terrain, and it's going to lead to scenarios where maybe someone gets randomly screwed over. And that doesn't sound as fun. But I am interested in seeing how it's implemented regardless, because the idea of terrain influencing battles I do think is cool. I just want it to be not willy-nilly, not random. Anyways, moving on from there, because I think that's about all we're really going to see in this screenshot. Again, if I miss something, point it out. We get a little tidbit of a new nation. We get Pyrenees or Pyrenees. Once a kingdom of cavern-dwelling humans and their allies. Very cool. So this looks like a mixture of humans and giants. They have blood, nature, air, some earth, some fire, human infantry, crossbows and knights, sacred mouflon knights. We'll see more of these here in just a second. And yeah, they've got like a pan in there. That's cool. So this looks like a very interesting nation. I don't know if this, in fairness, this might not be actually a nation. This might just be kind of like a test scenario. But I assume that they put it in here for a reason, right? And one of the reasons that I assume that it's going to be an actual nation. One of the reasons that I think they might have actually put this screenshot in here is this particular scenario. These scales and blesses. One, I do like how this isn't very different from the Dominions 5 way of showing a nation, right? But this national features section is a little cleaned up, right? I am really interested in this scales and blesses turmoil limit +1 scenario. So I don't know if this is going to be maybe this is just this nation or just a handful of nations, but I would love the idea of more nations having starting scale influences, right? Plenty of nations have temperature preferences, which is fine, and I would love to see those continue. But I would also love to see different nations have either scales influences, or I'm questioning what this is this limit concept. What does that mean? Does that mean that Pyrenees can go to turmoil 4? Question mark? Is that a thing that we're going to add in here, that they can be even more tumultuous than other nations can be? Because that would be really cool. Having other nations, I think I like either. Either concept is neat. Having a nation that is like, this is an order +1 nation. They start off automatically, if you play this nation, they start at scale order +1. Cool, right? Or turmoil +1. Cool, right. That's fine. But the idea, that would be a neat, I think that would be thematic, I think that would be fun for a lot of nations. Okay? But the idea, instead of doing that, and instead of having a limit increaser, meaning that they could go to a order 4, or they could go to a magic 4, right? Or they could go to, this nation is incredibly misfortunate, right? Like they could go to misfortune 4, right? Doing something like that also seems really, really interesting. So I'm excited to see kind of like where this goes. This was the big thing that stood out for me amongst this nation. Obviously, I think more people are gonna dissect what the actual nation is, the combination of the units, what it's ultimately going to be about, etc., etc. We'll figure that out when the game actually comes out and we can actually get our hands on the nation. But from a tantalizing information, let's speculate kind of concept, I'm really interested in this part. Turmoil limit +1. What exactly does that mean? Very excited to see. moving on. We've got a clearer picture from this one, these Mouflon Knights down here, right? We have the Emerald Knight from Pest Arena, okay? But look at this. This is a cool show of the different units with the cavalry, right? Like we can see we are clicked on the Emerald Knight. These are the stats for the rider, not for the Mouflon. So the Mouflon is over here. You click on it, and then you can actually see the stats for the Mouflon. Very excited. I will say, you can see size 3. I'm assuming the rider is size 3, and then the combined unit of Mouflon and Emerald Knight is size 5. So these are from that giant nation that we were just looking at. Very, very, very cool. Everything here looks generally like Dominions 5, just cleaned up, prettied up, which is exactly what I'm wanting, right? Like, I say cleaned up, prettied up. Everything about Dominions 5 was already relatively clean, but we've got nicer icons. We've got clearer spacing, I think, between things. Other than that, though, I think we're looking at something that's relatively similar to what we have already seen. I'm wondering if this is just like a mounted icon, like this unit is mounted, and that's what that means, but we'll see. Nothing else, I think, here is a big surprise, right? Like, we're not seeing any new stats or anything like that. Just more repeats from the same, which is perfectly fine. I would love to have seen a screenshot of the Mouflon as well, but either way, very, very neat. So, these guys look pretty scary, by the way. Depending on what the Mouflon stats are and how things get handled with cavalry, I am somewhat concerned. I was talking about it earlier, right, with the idea of, like, glamour changing on a nation like Van. Again, Vanheim, for example, being a powerful nation for a player to step into, right? It's a good nation to get your bearing in the game in. It's also a very high ceiling nation. Like, a lot of really powerful players can play Vanheim really, 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 really well. These changes, right, to glamour, which is also changed to air, and to mounted units, both affect a nation like Vanheim. So I'm actually really, 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 really interested to see does Vanheim increase in their power curve and become a monstrosity, or is this gonna dip their efficacy? Are they gonna kind of like tank a little bit? Are we gonna run into balance issues where all of a sudden cavalry is overpowered, or are we gonna run into the opposite balance issue where all of a sudden cavalry is trash, right? Or is glamour going to be the end-all be-all, or is actually there going to be too much of a split between air and glamour, and both of them don't actually have their own identity? You know, I'm really curious to see how this all turns out. Anyways, moving on to the next screenshot. This is an underwater battle screenshot. We see a bunch of octopi, krakens, and sea trolls. And again, we see more examples of all of these various bits and bobs of terrain. Again, I'm very interested to see what happens with terrain. I'm especially interested to see, again, if there are ways that the player can influence terrain, right? Like spells to clear terrain, or spells to add terrain to a province. Actions like buildings, being able to build or dig a ditch, being able to build a palisade, being able to build a watch post or something like that, right? Being able to find magic sites that change the terrain or something like that. Those all sound really, 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 really cool. The idea of every battle just having procedurally generated terrain that's just shat out onto the map and might be interesting, might not be, that does not sound as cool to me. It is still cool. I am still interested in it, especially if different terrain does different things, right? Like, if it's just rocks and trees and a river, whatever. But if you can walk through that river, right? And there's actually like a malice to standing in it or something like that, or a bonus against you're wet, you can't get, hurt by fire as much. Or maybe there's like differing effects, like, oh, there's a thing, there's a magic site for a magic beacon, and if you cast a spell within 10 squares of that magic beacon on the battlefield, something happens, right? There are so many different potential ideas that I could see happening with this terrain concept, and it's really, 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 really cool. But the least interesting is just having little terrain things. So hopefully that's not it. Hopefully we're going to get more than that. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else that's super interesting in this picture. This is kind of neat. Okay, so this is the Pretender Design selection screen, picking your chassis, selecting the physical form, right? We can see Dominion 4, 3, 2, 1, all of that still remains. And it all still seems kind of like we would expect things. But I do like this UI, right? We still have the awakened monsters. We have the kind of like Titan chassis. We have the monuments or the immobiles, right? But we've got interesting new ones that we can see, right? So we've got this crystal monolith over here, this fire snake thing, very, very cool. Bunch of interesting things just looking at it. I also really like how this is set up, and we can see something that I think is another interesting feature hopefully in relation to that turmoil limit +1 concept. We see not only the magic paths of many of these gods, right? But we also see scale paths, scale influences. So I'm hoping what happens is when you select these gods, you automatically get, for example, this god is a heir to Earth 1, but also has an order pip. So I'm hoping you take this god and automatically your order scales are going to be increased by +1. I'm sure in the point value system that's going to be balanced in some way, shape, form, or fashion. I hope it's not just, oh, you're straight up just paying for the order scales by, paying the cost you normally would for order scales in the god. But I hope it's more than that. I hope there's something else beyond just that equation. But even if it was just that equation, I do think this is more interesting and more thematic than how gods work right now. Because while I do like the idea of build what you want, I think putting some strictures on the idea of, the golden boar, who is supposed to be a herald of the harvest, right? Or springtime, whichever it is, right? Like that kind of concept. Taking death on him should be a thing that a player can do, sure, but is it kind of antithematic to the boar itself? Yes. I think that should be a thing, right? So I'm actually really excited about that scenario. I also think, I don't know, but I think if we look through all of these, everything looks normal except for this new icon, right? Here, and I'm assuming those are going to be that's going to be the glamour icon. That being said, that icon is different from this one, which is fine, right? None of the gem icons match the others, but it's what's the phrase I'm looking for? Its difference is more pronounced to me, perhaps. Like this seems to be like a purplish, pinkish kind of like crystal or something like that. And this is kind of like this multicolored, faceted gem. So I am curious whether or not there's going to be any like, if this is just glamour, which I'm assuming it is, right? Or if we're getting baited and there's something else going on. My assumption is that this is just going to be the glamour symbol, but we'll see. So, anyways, I think that takes us to the last screenshot, which is just another big army screenshot. showing things like falling fires, showing a different melange of units, which is very cool. No examples of in-game battle UI, which I'm really hoping we get more battle UI updates as well. But yeah, I think overall I'm really excited about a lot of changes. I really do like the UI that seems to be happening here in this first screenshot. There's a couple of little teasers that I'm pretty excited about. There's a couple of things I'm a little concerned about, not because I think they're just gonna suck, but because I'm worried that maybe they might not be done in a way that I think is as good as it could be, right? You know? But overall, very, very excited. And yeah, I think that's probably going to be it. This is already a 40-minute video. I kind of was trying to aim for this to be a 30-minute video, but I got stuck in my own head squeeing about things. So that's, I think, going to be the summation of what is happening with this Steam page. Hit me up in the comments. I really want to see people's opinions about things, the ideas that they have. Maybe I've missed things. I guarantee I have missed several things that other people have caught. So let me know. Very excited to see all of the speculation on Dominion 6. And if you like things like this, let me know, and I will probably continue to do these types of things as we continue to get more announcements on Dominion 6. And potentially as we actually get closer to the launch date, once we get a launch date, get into closer to the launch date, I might actually start trying to do more things in kind of like involvement for that scenario. Because I do think most likely I will be one of those people that, unless the game comes out and it's just trash, which hopefully that's not the case, but I will probably be one of those people that's just like, okay, Dominions 5 is over. Onwards to Dominion 6. That being said, right, there are a lot of things specifically about Dominions 5 that I do love, and those are a lot of the active mods for Dominions 5. So, depending on how easy or difficult it is to port different mods over to Dominion 6, I'm hoping it's going to be very, very easy. I'm hoping that they made a big focus for that. Because the mod community, I think, is one of the reasons why Dominions stays alive, right? So I'm hoping that this is going to be a very easy transition from Dom 5 to Dom 6, and fingers crossed. Regardless, that's going to be the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know what you think. Please let me know what your ideas and hopes and suspicions and speculations are. Very excited. Probably getting myself too hyped. We got too many months before the end of the year. I'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing. It really helps me out. If you'd like to see me live, head over to my Twitch at twitch.tv/thedistanthorizon.